You're a key customer. Have you had a conversation with Dave Calhoun about what's going on over at Boeing?
We never stop communicating with our friends in Boeing and Airbus. Again, it is an issue, it is a problem. I'll take you back in the history a few years ago. 787, the Dreamliner, had the same issues, had the same, basically the history repeats itself. Look at the 787 now. It's one of the best aircrafts in the industry. It's one of the best aircrafts operating in our fleet.
For years, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was the crown jewel of Qatar Airways, a symbol of innovation, efficiency, and modern aviation. Promoted as lighter, smarter, and more reliable than anything that came before it, the aircraft quickly became the backbone of the airline's long-haul strategy. But over time, small issues began to surface. Delays with no clear explanation, systems that behaved strangely, and maintenance crews flagging problems that didn't match any known patterns. Then an internal report reached the CEO's desk, quietly, without press or public notice. It described structural inconsistencies, software errors that bypassed standard alerts, and components installed without proper verification. Within days, Qatar Airways started pulling Dreamliners from service, not for maintenance, but for good. The fleet was being sold off, not because of a single failure, but because of what that report revealed. This wasn't just a fault. It was something far more serious, a terrifying cover-up. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was once seen as the future of aviation. Lightweight, fuel-efficient, and packed with advanced systems, it promised a new standard for long-haul travel. Qatar Airways invested heavily in the aircraft, making it a core part of its international fleet. For years, it delivered on that promise. Publicly, the airline praised the Dreamliner as a smart and reliable machine. Passengers enjoyed quieter cabins and smoother flights, while the company promoted the aircraft as a symbol of progress. But behind the scenes, engineers began noticing strange patterns. Minor faults, hard to explain, started showing up. At first, nothing pointed to a crisis. The issues seemed isolated, more annoying than dangerous, but they didn't stop. And the more technicians looked into them, the more they questioned what was really going on. The Dreamliner was performing until it wasn't. It started with small delays and vague technical reports. Pilots mentioned systems that behaved strangely but showed no alerts. Instruments flickered, power reset unexpectedly, and autopilot disconnected without clear reason. Yet every post-flight inspection showed nothing wrong. Maintenance teams began logging similar issues across different aircraft. The problems were inconsistent but recurring, showing up in flight but vanishing on the ground. Some engineers started calling them ghosts in the system. Others believed they were just early signs of something deeper. Over time, patterns began to emerge. The same aircraft returned to the hangar again and again with similar unexplained faults. The data didn't make sense, and traditional checks couldn't find a cause. The planes weren't failing outright, but they were no longer trusted. An internal report changed everything. It came from a subcontractor and detailed flaws that had escaped standard inspection. Structural bonding issues, sensor misalignment, and software logic errors were all listed. One line stood out. The aircraft might stay in ground mode after takeoff. The report reached Qatar Airways' CEO directly. It wasn't shared with the public, only with a small internal team. Engineers began inspecting specific aircraft based on the memo's findings. What they found matched the warnings almost exactly. From that point, action was immediate. Dreamliners were pulled from service without explanation. Publicly, operations continued as usual. Internally, confidence in the aircraft collapsed. The issue was no longer technical, it had become personal. Qatar Airways began removing its Dreamliners from daily service. Some were sent to long-term storage, others quietly listed for sale. There was no press release or public statement. The decision was deliberate and kept out of headlines. Internally, it was clear the airline no longer trusted the aircraft. Too many warnings had been ignored. Too many issues brushed aside. The Dreamliner wasn't just unreliable, it had become unpredictable, and that was unacceptable. Other models were shifted into place to cover key routes. Flight schedules were restructured and crews reassigned. It wasn't a fleet adjustment, it was damage control, and it all started with a report no one was supposed to see. As engineers dug deeper, they found that Boeing had seen some of these issues before. Internal memos dating back years mentioned shimming problems, software bugs, and quality control failures. Most were labeled as minor and cleared without real resolution. Production timelines always came first. The FAA had flagged similar concerns during past audits. Reports mentioned torque calibration errors and components signed off without full verification. Boeing made adjustments, but never addressed the core problem. The flaws weren't isolated, they were part of the process. Qatar Airways realized this wasn't just a manufacturing error, it was a pattern of overlooked warnings and ignored risk. The aircraft wasn't failing by accident, it was failing by design, buried under paperwork and pressure to deliver. Inside Qatar Airways, the impact was more severe than anyone admitted publicly. With dozens of Dreamliners out of rotation, the scheduling team had to rebuild the long-haul network almost daily. Flights disappeared from booking systems, routes were merged, and delays became routine. Customer complaints flooded call centers, while agents followed scripts that no longer matched reality. To passengers, it looked like poor planning, but inside the company, it was crisis management. Pilots and crew members began expressing serious concerns. Autopilot systems reset without warning. Cockpit indicators gave false readings, and engines failed to respond during taxi. Mechanics reported recurring errors that vanished after reboot but returned days later. Teams couldn't isolate the causes, and each flight felt riskier than the last. People stopped trusting the aircraft, even when checklists said everything was fine. What was once seen as an elite fleet had become a logistical burden. Qatar Airways diverted resources just to keep operations from collapsing. Other aircraft were stretched thin, flight crews were rotated beyond comfort, and leadership knew this wasn't sustainable. The Dreamliner wasn't just failing in systems, it was damaging the company from the inside out. And the worst part was knowing they were still ahead of the curve compared to airlines who hadn't acted yet. As Qatar Airways moved quickly, other airlines began to notice their own red flags. Japan Airlines grounded two 787s after mid-flight power interruptions. Lufthansa logged repeated software inconsistencies that couldn't be traced to hardware. American Airlines quietly removed several Dreamliners from transatlantic routes. None of these moves were announced. They simply happened, buried under routine schedule changes. Across continents, the pattern repeated. Aircraft were pulled from service for extended maintenance without clear reason. Engineers reported strange faults that didn't show up in diagnostics. Systems disagreed mid-flight, then returned to normal as if nothing happened. Crews became uneasy, and flight planners started prioritizing older aircraft over newer 787s. Something was clearly wrong, even if no one said it aloud. Regulatory agencies couldn't ignore the silence any longer. The FAA reopened files on flight control firmware. The European Aviation Safety Agency called for urgent reviews. Australia and Canada raised concerns about long-term airworthiness. Still, airlines refused to speak publicly. What started as scattered technical issues had become a global retreat. But instead of headlines, the Dreamliner was fading quietly, one grounded plane at a time. The Dreamliner didn't fail with alarms blaring or metal tearing mid-air. It failed quietly, with systems that paused when they shouldn't, sensors that disagreed, and warnings that never came. Pilots noticed slight inconsistencies. Autopilot commands lagged. Instrument readings felt off, but passed every check. Maintenance teams flagged strange patterns, yet the diagnostics showed nothing unusual. The aircraft flew as if everything was normal, even when it wasn't. Qatar Airways acted before that illusion shattered. The decision to sell the entire 787 fleet wasn't reactive. It came after a growing list of silent failures that regulators hadn't addressed and manufacturers hadn't fully explained. The company chose not to gamble on public confidence or corporate reassurance. Their engineers no longer trusted what the systems reported. The Dreamliner didn't break all at once. It broke slowly, under pressure, in ways invisible to passengers but obvious to those paying attention. This isn't only about a single aircraft model. It's about a deeper failure in how modern aviation measures risk. The belief that complexity equals safety led to a machine no one fully understood, one that no longer questioned itself even when things went wrong. Qatar didn't just uncover software bugs or manufacturing gaps, they exposed a mindset that favors speed over caution, data over doubt, And while their fleet sits quietly on the ground, other airlines continue flying, hoping that silence still means safety. What do you think about Qatar Airways grounding their Boeing 787 fleet after discovering hidden issues? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more airline insights.